From meetings to the stage, this is Communication Studio.
Have you noticed how confident you feel explaining something to a colleague, and how that confidence quietly disappears the moment your boss joins the call? Same brain, same message, completely different delivery. And the opposite happens too. We speak to our teams with good intentions, lots of context, lots of care, and somehow they still leave the room unclear about what's actually expected. Hierarchy does something weird to communication. The moment power, pressure, or permission enters the room, our language changes. We hedge, we over-explain, we apologize. Or we go the other way. We simplify too much, we rush, or we assume understanding. And none of that means we're bad communicators. It means we're human. Today, we're talking about communicating up and down the hierarchy at work. Not politics, not posturing, not managing up in the LinkedIn sense, just how to say what needs to be said clearly, confidently, and without losing your voice. Because communicating with your boss isn't the same as communicating with your team. And pretending it is usually where things go wrong. So if you've ever rewritten an email 12 times before sending it upwards, or walked away from a team conversation thinking, I thought that was obvious, this episode's for you. Let's get into it. Before we talk about how to communicate up and down the hierarchy, we need to understand why it feels so hard in the first place. Because most communication problems at work aren't about vocabulary, tone, or confidence. They're about risk. What changes in hierarchical conversations isn't intelligence or capability, it's what we think might happen if we say the wrong thing. So let's start there. Hierarchy doesn't automatically break communication. Fear does. When there's a power difference in the room, a real or perceived power difference, our brains start doing quiet maths. If we say this, what's the consequence? If I challenge that, will it reflect badly on me? If I'm too direct, will I sound difficult? And this calculation happens fast, usually before we've even finished the sentence in our head. This is why people communicating up often sound less confident than they actually are. Not because they lack ideas, but because they're trying to protect themselves. It's a survival instinct. You hear it in phrases like, I might be wrong, but this is probably a silly question. Just thinking out loud. All perfectly reasonable. All quietly weakening the message. Now flip the direction. When people communicate down the hierarchy, a different distortion appears. Leaders assume understanding because they understand. They give context instead of direction. Or they soften the message so much that the actual expectation gets lost. And when clarity disappears, people don't feel empowered. They feel exposed. They're left thinking, am I allowed to decide this? Or am I about to get in trouble for choosing wrong? So here's the key idea. Hierarchy doesn't change what needs to be said. It changes how safe we feel saying it. And when safety drops, language gets weird. We either pad the message or we strip it back too far. That's why the same person can sound hesitant in a leadership meeting and overly directive with their team, all in the same day. And once you see this, a lot of workplace communication suddenly makes sense. And more importantly, it becomes fixable. Let's talk about communicating up the hierarchy. This is the part of work where capable, intelligent people suddenly forget how to speak. Not because they don't know their stuff, but because the stakes feel higher. When you're speaking to someone with more authority, more experience, or more influence over outcomes, the instinct is to protect yourself. And that protection usually shows up as over-explaining. We start at the beginning. We add background. We justify every thought. And somewhere around minute 4, the actual point quietly disappears. Here's the shift that changes everything. Senior leaders don't need your entire thought process. They need orientation. Where are we? What's the risk? And what do you recommend? That's it. When communicating up, always start with the headline. Not the context, not the journey, the conclusion. So instead of saying, I just wanted to give you some background on what we've been working on because there were a few conversations last week and then something's changed, you say, we're recommending option B. It reduces risk and keeps us on schedule. You can add detail after. They might ask, but only if it's needed. You've given them the headline, you've given them the impact. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of the time, they won't want more. Another mistake people make when communicating up is bringing problems without ownership or a solution. They say, we've got an issue with the timeline, and stop there. What leaders hear isn't information. It's responsibility being handed upward. It's another problem they've got to solve. A better version sounds like this. We've got a timeline risk. I see 2 options, and I recommend adjusting scope rather than extending the deadline. Same problem, completely different signal. Now this matters. Communicating up does not mean pretending you're certain when you're not. It means removing unnecessary self-doubt from the language. There's a difference between being honest and undermining yourself before anyone else has a chance to question you. Compare, I might be wrong, but I feel like maybe this could be an issue, with, based on what we're seeing, this is a risk worth addressing. Same honesty, more authority. And here's the reframe I want you to hold on to. When you communicate up, you're not asking for permission to speak. You're contributing to a decision. And your job isn't to sound impressive. It's to make it easy for the other person to decide. Clarity is a kindness, especially upwards. So that's communicating up. Shorter than feels comfortable. Clearer than feels safe. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because the mistakes we make communicating up are almost the opposite of the mistakes we make communicating down. So let's talk about what changes when you're the one with the authority. When you communicate down the hierarchy, the problem usually isn't authority. It's ambiguity. Most leaders don't under-communicate, they just don't communicate clearly. You understand the goal, you know why it matters, you see the trade-offs, so you talk about the context. You explain the background, you share the pressure you're under, and everyone nods. Then they leave. And they all do different things. Not because they're disengaged, but because they're guessing. This is one of the hardest leadership lessons. And if you find yourself regularly chasing your team because they haven't done it yet, this might be a good section for you. Clarity comes before kindness. We soften instructions to avoid sounding harsh. We say things like, let's try to have this done by Friday. It would be great if we could look at this soon. What people hear is optional. Kindness without clarity creates anxiety. Clear communication down has 2 parts, direction and permission. Direction sounds like, this is the outcome we need by Friday. Permission sounds like, you can decide how to get there. Come to me if you hit a blocker. Without direction, people hesitate. And without permission, people escalate everything. Yes, context matters. But when the explanation keeps changing, people stop listening. Give the why once, then reinforce the expectation. Consistency builds trust. And finally, this matters more than most leaders realize. If you want questions, you have to make them safe. Not just, any questions? At the end of a meeting, but prompts like, what feels unclear? What might block this? What would you decide if I wasn't here? Because silence doesn't mean alignment, it usually means uncertainty. When you communicate down the hierarchy, your job isn't to sound supportive, it's to create certainty. Certainty gives people confidence, and confidence is what creates ownership or accountability. So when you strip it all back, communicating up and down the hierarchy isn't about status. It's about safety and trust. Upwards, we often speak as if we need permission. Downwards, we speak as if clarity will just somehow happen. I get it, so you should get it. And both come from the same place, avoiding discomfort. But good communication doesn't change who you are. It changes how you package up the message. Up the hierarchy, clarity creates trust. Down the hierarchy, clarity creates confidence. And if you sit in the middle, you're not stuck, you're translating. So here's something simple to try this week. Before your next conversation with someone senior, ask, what decision am I helping them make? And before your next conversation with your team, ask, what certainty am I creating? 2 questions, massive difference. If this episode resonated, you're not alone. Hierarchy quietly shapes most of our working lives, even when we don't talk about it. If you found this useful, share it with someone who lives in the middle or someone who keeps rewriting emails at midnight. And if you want more practical tools like this, follow Communication Studio wherever you're listening. Until next time, speak clearly, stay human, and remember, clarity is generous. Thanks for listening.
From meetings to the stage, this is Communication Studio.